The X-Men have a long history of colorful, varied adversaries. From folks like Mr. Sinister, the Hellfire Club, and Apocalypse, to somewhat goofier villains like Mojo and Arcade, the X-Men's Rogues Gallery contains some of the most dangerous and offbeat antagonists out there. But despite all of that, there's one opposing force in particular that forms what's probably the most immediate existential threat to the X-Men and mutant kind as a whole: the Sentinels. Sentinels are powerful, artificially intelligent robots designed by Dr. Bolivar Trask as a means to counter what he framed as the mutant question, firmly believing that the human race would become obsolete if the rise of mutant kind wasn't kept in check. Sentinels would grow beyond their initial programming, though, and decide that the best path forward for the Earth would be for humanity to be eradicated alongside mutants. This made Trask change his tune, leading to him sacrificing himself in an attempt to destroy his Sentinel production facility. Trask's legacy grew far beyond that incident, though, as the government, as well as his surviving family, including his son Larry Trask, ironically a mutant himself, would resurrect the Sentinel program at different points across time. There's been different models of Sentinels over the years, from the originals to the Mark II and III versions, to futuristic Sentinels like Nimrod, and human Sentinel hybrids like Omega Sentinel and Bastion, to name a few. Take a look at any story involving a hellish future for mutant kind, and trust me, there's a lot of them, and I guarantee more than half of them probably have Sentinels roaming around capturing and or killing mutants. Sentinel's first appearance in Capcom's Marvel Fighters was in 1994's X-Men Children of the Atom, and you can immediately tell just by looking at it that Capcom took some liberties. For one, the Sentinel in the game is much smaller than the usual Sentinels, which usually stand anywhere between 20 and 50 feet tall, while some particular variants can rival even skyscrapers. More striking, though, is the design. Sentinels in the comics have far more humanoid proportions, with simulated musculature proportionate to their figure. The Capcom design Sentinel leans more into the mechanical side of things, showing off multiple weapons via on-the-fly transformations. According to former Capcom staff member Katsuya Akitomo, the people at Marvel's licensing department apparently hated this design when Capcom initially showed them the design drafts, to the extent that the game's director Akira Nishitani had to personally fly out to the US and apologize in person to Marvel. Capcom did, however, plead their case for the design, and Marvel eventually relented. While the design has stayed exclusive to Capcom's fighting games, Marvel finally gave the design an official designation in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, named model number COTA-94, a nod to Children of the Atom in its release year of 1994. Akitomo went on to note that Marvel not liking their design initially is funny in hindsight, since a few Western artists over the years have mentioned Capcom's interpretations of Marvel's characters being big influences on them. Ed McGuinness in particular was mentioned as an artist that cited the Capcom fighters as a big influence on their art style, with Akitomo himself saying that he can see the Ackerman and Bendis influence when looking at their work. Sentinel in general is honestly one of the most impressively animated characters in the game, if not all of Capcom's Marvel fighters. As far as those go, the only other character I'd say is even more impressive in those regards is probably Spyro. What makes Sentinel in particular so impressive is how its sprite is constructed. It's made up of segmented sprites animating independently of each other. You can see this most clearly when looking at its idle pose. Sentinel also has an array of attacks involving extended limbs and pulling out all kinds of weaponry, all animated differently. It's really impressive stuff. Sentinel's voice actor in this game is Dan Hennessy. He was a pretty active voice actor from the 80s to about the late 2000s, his most well-known roles being Braveheart Lion in the Care Bears and the dad in Little Bear, which, wow, that's not a cartoon I've thought about in a long ass time. More relevantly though, he was a voice director in many shows, including X-Men the Animated Series, where he also provided the voice for Ruckus. There's a ton of stuff to talk about when it comes to Capcom's Sentinel incarnation, so without further ado, Sentinel is one of the most intimidating characters in Children of the Atom. Its array of projectiles allow it to control space pretty well, and its aerial mobility thanks to its flight mode means it's also a threat close up as well. It also has some of the highest defense in the game, though it takes extra damage from throws. The biggest thing Sentinel has going against it is its size. It's susceptible to a lot of unblockable setups. It has the longest recovery period if you choose not to roll when knocked down, and can be put into block stun infinite in certain situations. Sentinel has a few command normals worth noting. Sentinel can perform a unique OTG throw attack on a knocked down opponent by pressing down and either medium or heavy punch. Sentinel can actually walk forwards, backwards, and even jump while holding the opponent before pressing either punch button to launch them. Sentinel can charge its jumping medium punch attack by holding down and pressing medium punch. Sentinel will stop all aerial momentum while it's charging the attack. Sentinel can also perform a spinning body press attack by pressing down and heavy punch in the air. It's tricky to get anything to follow up off of this since Sentinel bounces off the opponent on hit. Sentinel's jumping medium kick has 4 separate angles that it can hit from depending on which direction you're holding. This one comes out if you hold up forward in medium kick. This one comes out if you hold forward in medium kick. This one comes out if you don't press any direction and hit medium kick in the air. And this one, while looking similar to the last one, comes out at an ever so slightly different angle and comes out if you hit down forward in medium kick. Holding down in heavy kick also gives you a new spinning blade aerial attack. Do keep in mind that Sentinel's normals are capable of chip damage. Sentinel's first special move is Rocket Punch, done with a quarter circle forward and punch. The punch drift determines the angle in which the punch travels. Light goes downwards at a 45-degree angle. Medium goes straight forward. And heavy goes upwards at a 45-degree angle. Sentinel can also retract this as a fake out if you hold back and press punch immediately after doing the rocket punch motion. Sentinel's next move is Sentinel Force, done with a quarter circle forward and kick. The kick strength determines what drone formation gets summoned. Light kick summons drones that fly in a set direction. Medium kick summons drones that at first seem to also fly in a set pattern. However, if you tap medium kick up to 3 times while they're active, they'll home in on the opponent. Heavy kick summons slow flying drones that carpet bomb the opponent. If you hold heavy kick, you can delay the bomb deployment for a bit. Sentinel's X ability in this game is Hover, which is its flight mode. Sentinel can move freely about the screen and can harass opponents with its aerial normals. It can block in flight mode, but be forewarned. If it flies close enough to the ground to be in jab range, characters with normals that can chip like Colossus can trap you in a block stun infinite, whittling you down until you're in KO range and then winning with a stray hit. Sentinel's super move is Plasma Storm, done with the quarter circle forward in 2 punches. Sentinel can mash punch to increase the charge level of the move, and repeating the super motion will cause Sentinel to fire off another wave of energy, for a total of up to 3 times altogether. Sentinel's stage in this game is Genosha. Genosha is a place in the X-Men universe that has quite the history. If you've read the Grant Morrison era of X-Men, or have been paying attention to a certain piece of X-Men media as of late, you already know what's up. Genosha is a fictional island existing in the Marvel Universe just off the coast of Madagascar. It was initially a human-controlled nation, with a majority of its wealth coming from mutant labor before the X-Men and New Mutants were able to help upset the regime. After a series of smaller conflicts, the United Nations gave Magneto control of the nation after requesting a mutant country for himself. Genosha was still not without its conflicts afterwards, but it eventually became the safe haven for mutants across the globe, amassing a population of around 16 million or so. This all came crashing down during the first arc of Grant Morrison's new X-Men run, E is for Extinction, which saw Cassandra Nova, Professor Xavier's evil twin that he killed while in the womb, and yes, I realize how goddamn wild that sounds, instigates a wild Sentinel attack on the island that more or less kills the vast majority of its population. That said, Genosha's inclusion in Children of the Atom predates this extinction event as well as Magneto's reign over the nation. The stage seems to take place in a Master Mode facility, with Master Mode themselves rising in the background shortly into the fight. Master Mode is essentially the Master Sentinel. It facilitates the creation of other Sentinels, and more often than not ends up expanding its ambitions beyond Sentinel creation and mutant extinction. The original Master Mode was destroyed when Trask voluntarily gave his life to destroy the facility, but at least 2 others were constructed afterwards. An interesting thing to note here is that in the main Marvel comic continuity, Genosha never had a Master Mode facility anywhere on the island to my knowledge. The Sentinels responsible for destroying Genosha years later were built in Ecuador and flew to Genosha. However, in the animated series continuity, which Children of the Atom borrows many of its voice actors from, there is a Master Mode facility there, so it's likely that the developers borrowed from the animated series here instead of the comics. There's a good chunk of machinery adorning the place. There's a control console of some sort in front of Master Mode, and some cranes up top, more than likely to assist in Sentinel production and transporting. The stage theme was composed by Seiun Nishigaki, who also composed the stage themes for Iceman and Psylocke, and is probably best known for being the composer of Kami's theme in Super Street Fighter 2. It's a fittingly industrial sounding track, fitting for a factory spawning mutant death machines. There's this ominous sense to it that isn't really present in any other stage theme in the game. Here are Sentinel's colors. And here's Sentinel's ending. Sentinel would disappear from Capcom fighters for a bit, popping up in Marvel vs. Capcom 1 in a limited capacity 4 years after Children of the Atom. There, Sentinel's a secret assist that can be chosen by holding medium punch, medium kick, heavy punch, and start on the assist select screen. This Sentinel assist is also a part of Onslaught's boss moveset, as well as his playable form in the Dreamcast and PS1 ports of the game. Sentinel went on to make their proper playable debut in the Versus games in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and man, there's a lot to talk about here. Sentinel is one of the 4 gods of Marvel 2, along with Storm, Magneto, and Cable, and usually considered to be a contender for second best, with Storm generally considered the best overall character. Sentinel notably has a really dogshit matchup against Cable, being so lopsided that it's considered one of the main reasons Cable's top tier in the first place, though Air Hyper Viper Beam and Incredible Zoning in general are definitely doing some heavy lifting. Before we move on to the moveset though, I actually want to talk about Sentinel's aesthetics in this game, and specifically their animations. This is something I've been wanting to talk about for a while, but I've held off because I think Sentinel illustrates the point better than most characters. So I think most people are aware that the console ports of the CPS2 based Marvel fighters featured animation cuts across the board to account for the smaller RAM pools in the 32-bit consoles of the time, namely the PlayStation and Sega Saturn. The latter console had fewer cuts than the former on a game-by-game basis, but still featured some altogether. What isn't as widely known is that the arcade versions of the games themselves, starting with Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, actually started cutting animations for returning characters as well. This was due in part to the general attack mechanics of the Versus series. Because the games essentially had to have 4 characters loaded into memory at a time, 2 for each side, this strained their RAM budget, and cuts had to be made to animations across the board to account for this. Take Cyclops' walk cycle, for example. In X-Men vs. Street Fighter, it's as fluid as it's ever been up to that point. In Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, however, you can see that some frames have been cut. Not enough that it looks jerky or bad or anything, but if you put them side by side, the X-Men vs. Street Fighter walk cycle looks a lot smoother. Another example is Spider-Man's crouching heavy punch animation. In Marvel Superheroes, it's a nice, fluid motion, but in Marvel 1 and 2, Spidey just kinda snaps into the attack because of the fewer frames present. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 wasn't beholden to the limits of the CPS2 board, thanks to being run on Sega's newer Naomi arcade board. But Marvel 2 upping the team dynamics to 3v3, meaning 6 characters had to be loaded into memory at once, on top of all of the new ways to tag partners in on the fly like delayed and team hyper combos, meant that they still ended up running against the hardware's limits. Sentinel's one of the more obvious examples of this. Compare their detailed auto animation in Children of the Atom to the jerky, almost non-existent auto animation in Marvel 2. It looks like it's malfunctioning. Even Sentinel's crouching pose got hit with the bat. It doesn't even animate at all. Sentinel isn't the only character that got hit pretty badly in those regards though. Characters with large sprites in the series like Juggernaut and Blackheart fell victim to animation cuts, but no one was hit quite as bad as Colossus. Note Colossus' auto animation here, and how it doesn't seem to perfectly loop. There's a noticeable jump in the frames when he's supposed to be exhaling. Compare that to Children of the Atom, where not only is his breathing animation a lot smoother, but he even has a unique pose he'll strike every now and again. Let's take a look at Colossus' command throw in Marvel 2. Here, it seems like the throw more or less just alternates between left and right frames for the desired effect. Sure, okay. But check out the Children of the Atom incarnation of the same attack. He has an entire rotating spinning animation that animates pretty smoothly. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying any of this makes Marvel 2 a bad or even disappointing game. If these were the sacrifices that had to be made, then sure, by all means. But I think it's actually pretty fascinating to see what technical shortcomings the development team had to overcome to get Marvel 2 in the state that it released in. I think it says a lot about the strength of the original sprite work, that a lot of people don't even actually notice the animation cuts in the post-X-Men vs. Street Fighter arcade entries. All that said, let's get into Sentinel's numerous changes going into Marvel 2. Like in Children of the Atom, Sentinel has high defense, taking 25% less damage from attacks than other characters in the game. Sentinel also gets super armor as well, meaning it can plow through stray hits completely unbothered, at least as long as you're on the ground. Sentinel does lose a few normals from Children of the Atom, most notably its wrist missiles and the spinning saw kick. Thanks to the consolidation of medium attacks in Marvel 2, Sentinel's rocket punches are arranged a bit differently. The light variant is the same as in Children of the Atom, but Heavy Rocket Punch now goes directly forward. Sentinel can still prematurely retract the Rocket Punch as in Children of the Atom though. The upwards Rocket Punch is now done with a Dragon Punch motion and either Light or Heavy Punch.
Rocket Punch.
As in Children of the Atom, all of these variations can be done in the air as well. Sentinel's flight mode is back as well, done with a quarter circle back and 2 kicks. Sentinel's mobility, despite its size, is a big part of what makes them so ridiculous in this game. We'll circle back to that in a bit. Plasma Storm no longer fires off waves of projectiles and can't be charged, but it can still be mashed for additional damage. Sentinel has a new hyper combo, Hyper Sentinel Force, done with a quarter circle forward and 2 kicks. This super is incredibly safe on block, and combined with Sentinel's heavy punch laser and rocket punch, can be looped into itself if you have the meter to spare. Do bear in mind that if normal Sentinel Force drones are on screen and active, you have to wait for them to clear the screen before you're allowed to use this hyper combo. Sentinel's second new hyper combo is Hard Drive, done with a quarter circle forward and 2 punches in the air. This one isn't quite as practical as their other supers and sees far less use, but I'm sure there's some useful applications of it out there somewhere. Alright, so with the moveset adjustments done, what exactly makes Sentinel so feared in this game? As it turns out, there's a few bugs and oddities involving Sentinel that can be exploited to increase Sentinel's damage and combo potential alike, and learning them is key if you want to play Sentinel at a competitive level. There's a few things to dive into here, so without any further delay, guard breaks are a pretty common thing to run into in competitive Marvel 2, and multiple characters have multiple setups for them, like Cable and Captain Commando. Sentinel has a pretty straightforward one that can be done on incoming opponents. As they're coming in, backdash and immediately use the Fierce Punch laser to get them blocking, and then cancel in the Heavy Rocket Punch. If you did it right, you'll guard break them. You can immediately go for a Hyper Sentinel Force loop here by using it once, juggling them with the laser and rocket punch afterwards, and then going right into it again. This does a pretty big chunk of damage on most characters, so it's definitely worth attempting on snapback or incoming taggings. That said, let's talk about the crouching variant of Sentinel's laser, since it has a really weird but ultimately beneficial property. See, the attack is kind of bugged. In the last few frames of the attack register as a second hit and doesn't trigger guards if timed perfectly. Hit any earlier and the laser will hit normally and will be blocked accordingly. Hit exactly on those last few frames though and the laser becomes unblockable. If you hit this, you can cancel the laser into Heavy Rocket Punch and begin the Hyper Sentinel Force loop sequence from earlier for a ton of damage. The trick is to time the laser so that the opponent falls into it just as it's disappearing. Flight mode in Marvel 2 works a bit differently than in Children of the Atom for Sentinel, the most notable change being that Sentinel can't block when in flight mode anymore, at least usually. However, Sentinel can call assists in the air during flight mode, enabling some flight mode bread and butter combos with assists like Psylocke's anti-air. Because flight mode isn't tied to a resource like in Children of the Atom, Sentinel can activate flight whenever it pleases. Sentinel can also refly as well. This is done by being in flight mode, quickly disengaging flight and then re-engaging it. Do it fast enough and you'll be able to string together certain moves in flight mode that weren't possible before. But the flight rabbit hole gets even deeper, believe it or not. Ever notice when Sentinel or any other flight-capable character in Marvel 2 activates flight, there's a brief period where they can't act as the flight state engages? As it turns out, Sentinel has a way to circumvent this: Fast Fly. Take Sentinel's Jumping Light Kick and Heavy Kick combo. If you were to do it, cancel it into flight and then attempt it again in flight mode, the combo would more than likely drop between the flight mode activation and the second Jumping Light. Using Fast Fly though, we can get this to connect easily. When canceling in the flight mode, do the motion for flight, quickly return the stick or pad to neutral, then hold forward and press attack at the same time. If you did it right, Sentinel should be able to cancel the recovery of the flight activation right into its flight normals. This enables quite a few air and flight combos that wouldn't be possible otherwise. We're missing the most important piece of the flight combo puzzle here though. Unfly is simply put a bugged state that has some slight origins in a similar glitched flight mode that can occur in Children of the Atom, though the Marvel 2 version has far more practical application. In Marvel 2, you traditionally only get one aerial action in the air, be it blocking or attacking. Use that action up, and you are sitting duck until you hit the ground. This principle is what guard breaks are traditionally built around, forcing your opponent to use up their aerial action on incoming, and immediately following up with an attack to nail them in that brief vulnerable state. Refly notwithstanding, this is also the case for disengaging flight. Once you turn off flight mode, unless you refly, you can't act again until you hit the ground. Normally anyway. If you hit a character while they're in their flight mode with an attack that sends them down to the ground but doesn't cause a hard knockdown, they'll be in unfly mode. In unfly mode, if flight is disengaged, the character can act instantly out of flight, allowing them to block or attack near instantly without having to reset their aerial actions by touching the ground. In Sentinel's case, using a combination of Fast Fly, Refly, and Unfly can enable some absolutely ridiculous combos, but you definitely need to have pretty good execution to pull them off, let alone consistently. Unfly is pretty finicky though. If you normal jump at any time while Unfly is active, you will lose it, and the only way to get it back is to start the whole Unfly process over again, which means getting hit. Do keep in mind that super jumping while Unfly is active doesn't affect it at all. There's no visual indicator that you're in Unfly mode, so you'll have to be paying close attention to know for sure. It also bears mentioning that you can only go into this mode a few times, usually 5 or so before it stops working, so be cognizant of your movement while the mode is active. Sentinel's first assist is Rocket Punch. Sentinel's second assist is its launcher. Sentinel's final assist is Sentinel Force. Here are Sentinel's colors. Color 5 looks to be based on the color scheme of the Mark III Sentinels commanded by Stephen Lang in the comics. The Mark III Sentinels uniquely had the capability to conjure up bubbles called atmospheres. These were essentially life support cages that could hold and transport captured mutants. One of Sentinel's win poses in Children of the Atom depicts it using one of these spirits on KO'd opponents at the end of a match. Recommending a specific comic for Sentinel is a little trickier than normal, since they're so often solely used as tools of mutant destruction with little other purpose. There are some pretty interesting stories relating to Sentinels out there though. There's 2 miniseries from the mid-2000s simply called Sentinel, that center around a teenager that discovers a busted Sentinel in their junkyard and ends up reprogramming and forming a bond with it. The Here Comes Tomorrow arc of Grant Morrison's new X-Men run features a similar concept, featuring a reprogrammed Sentinel fighting on the mutant side. The crossover story Acts of Vengeance is more of an Avengers story than an X-Men story, but does feature the first appearance of the Tri-Sentinel. Basically, 3 Sentinels fused to each other by Loki in a last-ditch attempt to destroy New York City. Issues 58 and 59 of Uncanny X-Men form a 2-part story featuring the X-Men's first run-in with Mark II Sentinels, featuring some phenomenal interior art by Neil Adams. That's kind of the funny thing about Sentinels. They're either cannon fodder or the deadliest things ever in most X-Men stories. There's one X-Men story in particular I think is a classic example of Sentinels being an immediate all-hands-on-deck threat for the X-Men though. This video's comic book recommendation is issues 98, 99, and 100 of Uncanny X-Men. This is a 3-part Chris Claremont story featuring the giant-sized X-Men era team's first encounter with the Sentinels. It starts off on Christmas night with the team enjoying the snow in Rockefeller Center. Scott and Jean are trying to relax and take it easy, Wolverine is brooding, Nightcrawler and Colossus are flirting with passerby, typical X-Men stuff. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby even have a funny little cameo appearance here, and if you look closely at some of the faces in the background, you can see characters like Nick Fury and even a certain couple from a competing comic company. This semblance of normalcy only lasts for about 3 pages before new Mark III Sentinels crash Rockefeller Center to capture the X-Men, resulting in an all-out fight for survival in the middle of Midtown. Jean and Scott hit one Sentinel with a 1-2 telekinesis and optic blast combo, and god damn, Scott must have had some meter saved up for that optic blast. This is also notably the first time Storm has encountered a Sentinel, and let's just say things don't go well for the remaining Sentinels. The X-Men themselves aren't the only ones being targeted though. Charles Xavier, enjoying a vacation with a friend helping him with a separate issue, finds himself battling Sentinels at sea that have come for him. Some of the team end up getting captured by the Sentinels though, where it's revealed that these Mark III Sentinels are the work of Stephen Lang, an anti-mutant bigot who worked his way up through the highest levels of government to get access to the Sentinel design notes of Bolivar and Larry Trask so that he can construct a new generation of Sentinels. The rest of the team end up getting a rocket ship into space to rescue the team from Lang's orbital base where the Sentinels were being constructed. The Mark III Sentinels aren't the only threat though. Lang commissioned a new brand of Sentinels. X-Sentinels, androids that look and have powers similar to the original 5 X-Men, though underneath it all, they're still mechanical. It's a pretty fast-paced story with a ton of great action and highlights Sentinels as more or less being a physical manifestation of anti-mutant bigotry. If you are so inclined to continue reading onwards, the last page of issue 100 ends up dovetailing into what's probably the most famous X-Men storyline of all time, so there's that to look forward to if you find yourself enjoying the book. Sentinel made an appearance in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, though it wasn't without some pushback from Marvel apparently. Sentinel was allegedly one of a number of X-Men characters Capcom pitched to Marvel as a returning veteran, but was initially denied by Marvel. According to producer Ryota Nitsuma, he and the development team protested the rejection, emphasizing Sentinel's importance to the competitive legacy of the series, citing its popularity in Marvel too. Marvel eventually relented, and Sentinel made it to the roster. I've seen some articles stating that Capcom was forced to make a decision between either Juggernaut and Sentinel, and while there are interviews where it's stated that Juggernaut was pitched but didn't go anywhere due to being a low priority character for Marvel, I can't find any source interview connecting him with Sentinel. Sentinel was one of 4 unlockable characters in the initial release of Marvel vs. Capcom 3, being the second unlockable character, obtained by accumulating 4,000 player points. In Marvel 3, Sentinel was voiced by Jim Ward. Ward's done a lot of work in the VA space for both television and video games, notably voicing Jack Krauser in Resident Evil 4 and Darkside Chronicles, Doug Dimmadome, owner of the Dimsdale Dimmadome in The Fairly OddParents, and Captain Quark in the Ratchet & Clank games. He's notably reprising his role here from Wolverine in the X-Men, where he also voiced Sentinels alongside providing the voice for Professor Xavier and Angel to name a few. Sentinel's theme in Marvel 3 is a remix of the Genosha stage theme from Children of the Atom. It's notably one of 2 stage themes from that game to make it into the Versus series, the other being Omega Red stage theme, which was remixed for Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter. This is definitely one of those why do I hear boss music fighting game themes. It takes the ominous presence of the original composition and ratchets it up tenfold, what with the chorus in the background belting out the song's main melody. It really drives home the fact that these are basically death machines built for mutant extinction. For a lot of unlucky mutants, a Sentinel is probably the last thing they see before being vaporized. The first month or so of Vanilla Marvel 3's lifespan was kind of hilarious, because for that span of time, Sentinel actually had the highest health total in the game, coming in at about 1.3 million, eclipsing even Thor, who comes in at a little over 1.2 million. This, combined with Level 3 X Factor, made Sentinel a formidable anchor character for players that didn't know the Sentinel matchup, making it the target of a bunch of memes at release. It was a pretty wild time to be playing the game. Not long after, Sentinel's health got nerfed to a little over 900,000, making things a bit more manageable for players that struggled against them. Sentinel essentially plays like a streamlined version of its Marvel 2 incarnation, sans most of its flight mode shenanigans. Rocket Punch is back, done with a quarter circle forward and any attack. The attack strength dictates the angle, and the angles function exactly like they do in Children of the Atom. Light being downwards, medium being straight ahead, and heavy being upwards. These can be done in the air as well, and the light variant also hits OTG on the ground and in the air as well. Sentinel Force has 3 variants again, the light version sending out 3 Sentinels one by one at a slightly downwards angle, and the medium doing the same but slightly upwards. The heavy variant, now called Sentinel Force Bomb, is a carpet bombing as usual, though you can't influence the bomb deployment anymore. The heavy version can OTG, but considering its startup and Sentinel's more reliable OTG option than Light Rocket Punch, you'll rarely see this utilized for that. Sentinel has a new command grab, Human Catapult, done with a Dragon Punch motion and attack. Being a command grab, it can notably be carry cancelled from its normals, which gives it some neat utility. Sentinel once again has a flight mode in this game, but it's pretty tame here. Sentinel can't fly for anywhere near as long in this game and is best used for mobility or using its ability to be cancelled from most of Sentinel's normals for combo extensions. Plasma Storm functions similarly to its Marvel 2 incarnation, allowing for more hits if players mash the attack buttons. Hyper Sentinel Force is also similar to its Marvel 2 incarnation. It's admittedly a little slower, but it's still safe on block, and Sentinel can actually combo off of this if you're close enough to the opponent. It's good for punishing bad assist calls from your opponent or protecting your own assist calls. Hard Drive is the super that's been buffed the most here, now being fully invulnerable for its duration on top of being cancelable from Sense air normals and special moves. Sentinel can effectively use this to get out of sticky situations, like incoming mix-up setups, as long as it has meter to spare. The last hit of Hard Drive sends the opponent into a spinning soft knockdown state that Sentinel can combo off of with a low crouching medium, making it great for combo extensions. Sentinel's first assist is the medium variant of Sentinel Force.
Yes.
Sentinel's second assist is the heavy variant of Sentinel Force. Sentinel's third assist is the light variant of Rocket Punch. Here are Sentinel's colors. Color 2 is based off of the Sentinel Mark III design as seen in X-Men Mutant Apocalypse on the Super Nintendo. Color 3 is based off of Nimrod. Nimrod is an incredibly powerful, highly advanced Sentinel sent from an alternate future timeline that can shapeshift into a human-esque form, among other things. While its prime directive was initially the extermination of mutants, a chain of events stemming from its time in the past changed Nimrod's goals to be a bit more altruistic. In a fight with a revived Master Mode though, both are caught in an explosion after Master Mode is tricked by Nimrod into self-destructing, and what's left of both robots end up passing through the Siege Perilous, a magical gateway that grants those who pass through it a new body, but no memories of their past life. We'll talk about what that leads to in a bit. Color 4 is also Nimrod based, this time on the black Nimrod variants that show up in X-Men Second Coming, the third and final part of the X-Men Messiah trilogy. Color 5 is based on the Mark V Sentinel design. Color 6 is the legendary Mango Sentinel, a custom Sentinel color in a modded version of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 that was immortalized in a viral Marvel vs. Capcom 2 video featuring FGC legend IFC Yipes' increasingly hilarious commentary of various high-level Marvel 2 matches. Marvel 3 in general contains a lot of nods to that particular video, so the development team must have found the Marvel Baby video just as hilarious as we did. Sentinel's alternate outfit is based on its classic design, specifically looking closest to the Mark II Sentinel variant. This Sentinel design can also be seen in the background of the Days of Future Past stage. Speaking of which, Days of Future Past is a pretty unique stage, in that it's a Marvel stage that's a retrofitted variant of a Capcom stage from the initial release, Final Fight's Metro City. Days of Future Past is the alternate future timeline I mentioned that Nimrod hails from, and the story itself is probably the second most well-known X-Men story behind the Phoenix Saga. Taking place in the far ahead in the future year of 2013, mutants are rounded up en masse and essentially put into labor camps, with any that dare challenge the natural order being exterminated. Nearly all of the X-Men, as well as the world's superheroes, have been killed, with the few remaining devising a last-ditch plan to send Kitty Pryde's mind back in time to the body of her past self, in order to prevent the incident that brings about that future, the assassination of Senator Robert Kelly. Speaking of iconography, perhaps the most recognizable thing from the story itself is the cover of Uncanny X-Men 141, featuring an older, more worn-down Wolverine and an older Kitty Pryde in front of a wanted poster detailing the grim fates of the mutants we'd come to know and love at that point. This poster gets recreated for this particular stage, with a twist. The poster features Marvel vs. Capcom 2 veterans that didn't return from Marvel 3. Cyclops, Captain Commando, Marrow, Iceman, Jin, Cable, Sansan, and Amingo have apparently been killed, while Colossus, Ruby Heart, Gambit, Hayato, Psylocke, Rogue, and BB Hood have all been apprehended instead. Funnily enough, the only character whose fate in the stage is left unconfirmed is Mega Man. And considering the series was kind of on a pretty depressing hiatus at that point in time, probably best that they didn't stir the pot there. There's two Sentinels on both sides of the burned out apartment building in the center of the stage, just standing around menacingly. Though the stage leans far more towards Marvel here, there's still a bit of Final Fight love, with the Mad Gear member 2P, who may or may not be the Player 2 character from Forgotten Worlds, hanging on for dear life on the side of a building looking pretty terrified. The subway station entrance that appears in the Metro City stage is here as well, albeit not looking too great, since the Sentinel seems to have stepped on it a bit. These station entrances look near identical to the ones used for many subway stations for the New York City Metropolitan Transit Authority, usually abbreviated as MTA. Looking upwards, you get a view of what looks like the Empire State Building, or at least Metro City's version of it, and although this is hard to spot during actual gameplay, there's Sentinels that fly back and forth through the skies, really selling that feeling that nowhere in this world is safe from them. This is the closest thing Sentinel has to a stage in this game, so I felt it'd be more appropriate for this video than for the eventual Hagar one, whenever I get around to that. Here are all of Sentinel's character interactions.
Unknown entity, proceeding with extreme caution.
What is this mockery? It's you or die.
Analysis incomplete. Returning with incapacitated target. Unidentified object found. Entering combat mode.
Found a mapping. I'll take care of it. Go for broke.
Target destroyed. Retrieving useful technology. Mutant entity detected.
Yo, Buckethead. Let's have some fun. Go for broke.
Mutant entity eliminated. Operation successful. Project Richard Rider England. Analyzing.
I'm the only Guardian the galaxy needs.
Ready?
Query to master mode. Should Nova Claws be eliminated? Query is subject to mutant. Analyzing. Analyzing. Analyzing.
Ready?
Demonic entity terminated.
This might honestly just be a happy coincidence, since it's an obscure lore detail from an even more obscure Capcom series, but the Firebrand in the Gargoyles Quest games, and in turn the Versus series, is in fact canonically a descendant of a mutant species of gargoyles. Sentinel also got this one quote added specifically to Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Remember how I mentioned the Siege Perilous and Nimrod in Master Mode remains going through it? The result of that was the birth of Bastion, a human-Sentinel hybrid hell-bent on the destruction of mutant kind. Bastion's plan to realize said destruction culminated in Operation Zero Tolerance, a concerted effort that saw the X-Men targeted in specific ways in an attempt to eliminate them once and for all, through the use of Prime Sentinels, which are essentially humans outfitted with cybernetic implants and weaponry to act as sleeper agent Sentinels. Operation Zero Tolerance also gets name dropped directly in Sentinel's one quote versus Wolverine. And here's Sentinel's ending. I think when all is said and done, you can't deny that Sentinel is one of the most iconic Marvel vs. Capcom characters. Be it its competitive dominance in Marvel 2, the meme legacy of Mango Sentinel, or just the fact that it's a unique Capcom take on an established Marvel design, Sentinel is a character that you're absolutely going to remember. I think Sentinel honestly represents everything that's unique about Marvel vs. Capcom. It's a decidedly Japanese mecha flavored take on a Western giant robot design, and it comes together in a way that's far better than it sounds on paper. It represents some of the most impressive and disappointing animation the series has had to offer. And for better or worse, there's not too many fighting game characters out there that fight quite like Sentinel. Well, okay, I guess Ultron kind of fits that mold in Marvel Infinite, but you get what I mean, right? Sentinels have appeared in at least one other X-Men fighting game, X-Men Next Dimension, along with Bastion, funnily enough. Sentinels being so intimately tied with the legacy of the X-Men franchise means that we don't have to worry about not seeing them in other media, so there's that at least. All that said, that's going to do it for this video. As always, thanks for watching, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.